Welcome everybody to the 2017 Alumni Day Stoop Stories session. And woo, all right, yes, yeah. That's the kind of energy we want on a Friday afternoon, absolutely. All right, so welcome to The Good Fight, stories about being a public health advocate. I'm Brian Simpson. I'm editorial director here at the School of Public Health, and I'm very fortunate to be hosting the second Stoop Stories here, which is a great event because this is so important for us to share the stories of public health and to hear from each other about the work that goes on here. So welcome to everybody, and if you've been here earlier during the day, thanks so much for sticking around. If you're just coming to the Alumni Day, joining us now, you're welcome, and you're also welcome too if you're tuning in via the live stream. So thanks so much for joining us. So I do have to apologize right off the bat. I know that JL DeBakey worked really hard to get somebody better than me to host. And you know, she tried really hard. She had a great speaker possibility, but Martin Shkreli, the pharma bro, not available. And she moved on, but Donald Trump wasn't available either for some reason. Apparently he's got some kind of reality show going on now, I don't know. But you're stuck with me. So I'm an alum here of the school, graduated in 2013 with an MPH, and so I feel very fortunate to be here and to be sharing the stage with my illustrious fellow alumni who have some amazing stories to tell. So I have to tell you, I've got the best job in the world because I'm here at the Bloomberg School in communications, and I'm working right at the nexus of storytelling and public health. And that is where I'm most happiest, and I'm very happy to be here because there's so many important stories that we need to share, and we're going to hear a lot of those tonight. So first thing though, I have to tell you about Global Health Now. If you don't know it, it's a news website and a daily email. It's we say it's the essential news and views in global health. So if you don't know it, please check us out at globalhealthnow.org and subscribe to the daily email. And it's a quick scan of what's happening in the world. So this is one of our big efforts in storytelling and public health. So if you don't know Stoop Stories, it is a local Baltimore production. They started in 2006, and it's basically, their tagline is, ordinary people sharing extraordinary tales, true tales of their life. And if, I was thinking about that, and it's like, well, you know, we're gonna have to change their tagline for this event because these are extraordinary people telling extraordinary true tales of their life. So we're so grateful for Laura Wexler and the Stoop Stories team working with the school here, and especially with JL DeBakey, Erica Jungst, and Jess Gill on the constituent relations team, and all the folks who made today possible. So thanks so much to all of y'all for your work. So I love today's story. I love today's topic, advocacy, because it is indeed the good fight, and it's the fight for what's important in the world, and it's a fight for the people who need that support. And as I was recently looking at several of Dean Clagg's former fall dean's letters. I was actually reading them in the evening, which I normally do most evenings. I'm sure you do too, right? The former, oh yeah. Well, yeah, previous letters, okay. So I did come across the 2011 letter, and it started off with a quote, and it said, "We don't do advocacy." And this was Dean Clegg recalling what a faculty member told him when he was interviewing for the deanship. And the very next line after Dean Clegg explained that, his very next line was, I knew even then that nothing could be further from the truth. And that is so true, because Dean Clegg, in that letter, you were able to go through and list many of the incredible successes in global health, in public health and advocacy, starting with William Henry Welch, who was our first dean, who advocated for public health research and education, E.V. McCullum, who not only discovered vitamins A and D, but was a huge advocate for proper nutrition, and even had a monthly column in McCall's magazine. Dean Clegg also listed Ellen McKenzie as one of a great public health advocate in injury and trauma research, and who is going to be succeeding him. That's right. That's right. The power of the dean's letter. Never underestimate it. So try and lobby with Ellen to get in the next dean's letter. That would be my advice. All right. So we all agreed on the importance of of public health advocacy, and it's great to talk about how important that is and key that is. But it's quite another thing to see it actually happening on the front lines in the real world, and that's what we're here today to do. So we've got 6 storytellers sharing true personal stories of their one moment in public health advocacy. So I'm super excited about that. And I want to tell you too that you're not just going to be here to listen, because we're going to do 3 stories, and then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to ask the audience members to participate. So we're going to pick 3 people to come up on stage, share your moment in 3 minutes, no more. And then we'll hear from you, and then we'll go back to the remaining 3 storytellers. So once again, thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for listening to me, and I'm going to go ahead and move right along and introduce our first storyteller. So Dr. Amita Vyas is an associate professor at George Washington University School of Public Health. She earned her master's and PhD at the Bloomberg School in Population and Family Health Sciences, and she is the director of the Maternal and Child Health Program at GW, and her work focuses on women's and adolescent health. She is the founder of the Global India Fund, a nonprofit that inspires global philanthropy and service by supporting innovative health and education programs in India. She also co-produced Girl Rising India, a national campaign on girls' education and gender equality. Please help me welcome Dr. Vyas. Thank you.
When I was 19 years old, I read a book about a physician who traveled across the globe to work with the poorest of the poor. 6 months later, I boarded a plane for Calcutta, India, a place I had never been to before, and I literally knocked on the door of Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity. You see, stories that capture our attention, that hold our attention, they can build empathy in us. They can transport us into another world. That is the power of storytelling. And reading that one book, that one story, inspired me in my journey to public health. During my time working in Mother Teresa's Missionary for the Dying and Destitute, I worked with countless women who were there to spend the last days and weeks of their life. And I listened to their stories as I bathed them, as I fed them, as I helped to clean their bed sores and caress their aches. I listened to their stories and realized that because they were women, that was a huge part of why they had ended up at this Center for the Dying and Destitute. That experience put me on my journey to public health and brought me here to this school. In 2007, I had the privilege of working with Population Services International, National Geographic, and Ashley Judd. We traveled to India to work on a documentary on HIV/AIDS. And once again, I found myself listening to women and their stories, listening to them tell me about how they had been trafficked as young adolescent girls into commercial sex work. I also listened to the NGOs on the ground, those who were providing life-saving HIV prevention and treatment services. And I had the realization that these countless organizations that work on the ground, that build clinics and build schools, provide vaccines and medications and books and scholarships for girls, they will only flourish, they will only have deep impact if we can ensure that those girls actually make it through the door. And to do that, we need to change the way girls are valued. And storytelling can do that. It also led me to a most powerful truth, that investing in girls to ensure that they are healthy, that they're educated, and free from violence is perhaps the greatest opportunity of our lifetime. In 2014, I had the honor of joining Girl Rising as a producer. Girl Rising uses the power of storytelling to change the way parents to presidents value girls, changes their hearts and minds, changes their attitudes, and builds a global movement for adolescent girls. The film tells the story of 9 girls in 9 different countries around the world, and each of these girls triumph over the incredible gender-based discrimination and barriers that they face in their communities. And today, we are launching girl-focused country campaigns, girl rising campaigns going country by country to change the way people value girls. And we have started in India, the place where I first learned how gender inequality is at the root of so many of our public health challenges today. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and that is exactly the age at when being a girl becomes dangerous to her life. That's the age when they're, in many places around the world, when they're likely to drop out of school, to be married off, suffer from anemia, perhaps children far too early in life. As a mother of a 13-year-old daughter, that is unacceptable to me. You see, my 13-year-old daughter has big dreams. And whether you're a 13-year-old girl living in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., or in the remote Atlas Mountains of Morocco, or in the poorest townships of Cape Town, adolescent girls have big dreams for themselves. I know this. I have worked in those communities. I have listened to their stories. But the problem is everybody else around that adolescent girl. The parents, her teachers, her community members, her other adult family members, her siblings. We need to change the way they think about this girl, how they value her. Are they willing to make an investment in her health, in her education? Girls like my daughter, Syra, and like millions of other adolescent girls around the world, they are smart, they are courageous, and if given the opportunity, they will ensure that our world is a more prosperous place for everyone. And so I wake up every morning more determined than ever to ensure that those opportunities are there and that becomes a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vyas. And as the father of a 14-year-old daughter, I applaud what you're doing and can realize how very important that is. So thank you for that. And I also appreciate, too, how you took story into action. And I think that that's sort of will be kind of a theme for what we want to achieve today, too, is to take those stories and see how they move into action and change things. So that's sort of the ultimate goal. Thank you again. And so we're moving on now to Dr. Kathleen Dooling. Dr. Dooling is a public health physician from Canada. She came to the Bloomberg School in 2006 for her MPH. Little did she know that the practice of public health would lead her even deeper south. She is now a medical epidemiologist at the CDC and working on vaccine-preventable diseases. Please welcome Dr. Dooling.
Good afternoon, everybody. So it was 2009. I was a newly minted medical officer starting my first job in Peel region, which is a peri-urban area just to the west of Toronto. About 1.2 million people live there. So, I had a lot of education by this point. I had 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, 5 years of residency, one of which was doing my MPH here. I felt I was pretty prepared. But I don't think any of that truly prepared me for my first job diving into the H1N1 pandemic. So it kind of felt like I had been catapulted into the eye of a hurricane. The first wave of the pandemic had passed. And if you recall, that started with a few cases of this new variant influenza emerging from Southern California and Mexico. And then within a snap, it spread throughout the world. But we still didn't know that much about it. We knew a few things. We knew that children and pregnant women were dying of this virus at unprecedented rates. And we knew that there was likely a second wave coming. We just didn't know when. We knew that there was a vaccine on the way. We just didn't know when. So it became a race for those of us planning at the local level of, well, what would come first? Would we be hit by the second wave of the pandemic, or would we actually have a tool to prevent it in our hands before it hit us? So in addition to those uncertainties, we didn't really know how many people would get the vaccine when it came. There was a lot of hesitancy in the population. People weren't sure how effective this vaccine was going to be against a brand new variant influenza type. There was a lot of skepticism about the safety. It was a new adjuvant. People weren't sure. So I spent much of my time in that period, in the eye of the storm, out there speaking on local cable, talking to local citizen groups, talking to my physician colleagues to try to promote this vaccine as a way to mitigate this second wave of the pandemic. But then something happened that changed everything. In our community, a 10-year-old boy died of influenza. And you could not have had a more all-Canadian kid. He was star of the hockey team. He was loved by his community and his family. And he was previously absolutely healthy before he died of this virus. So that sent a shockwave of fear, not only through me, through our community, and through the entire country. All of a sudden, people's risk perception was ultimately changed by that event and how it touched them as people. So fast forward a couple of weeks, we get news that the vaccine is going to arrive ahead of when it was previously scheduled. So we scrambled. It was like turning a very large ship. We were burning the midnight oil, trying to make sure that we had everything in place to open clinic doors the day that vaccine arrived on our doorstep. And we managed that with a small clinic that would start before we got up to full capacity. So that night I went home late after work, not really knowing what the next day would bring. Would people actually show up to get this new vaccine that there was so much uncertainty about? Well, that morning before the clinic opened, I got a call from my colleague who said, "You really should get down here. You need to see this." So I went down to this industrial area where we had our vaccine clinic. It was a cold, blustery, late October day in Canada. And our doors were still closed. We weren't open yet, but people were lined up. And people were lined up by the dozens. And I tell you, this is something I will never forget as long as I live. People were lined up around the corner. So I went around the corner, and people were lined up all the way down the building and around that corner too. Mothers clutching their babies, waiting to get the vaccine, whole families waiting to get this vaccine. And hundreds were there waiting before we even opened our doors, and hundreds more came that day to get the vaccine. And, I think what I realized that day is that we are in the business of prevention, we're in the business of health, but we're at our best when we recognize that sweet spot between hope and fear, and we can catalyze that into improved health. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think that shows the power of those moments when you really realize what public health can do, and the power of communication as well. Thank you. So next up is CJ Madugulike, who since his childhood, anyone who has ever met CJ quickly found out one key fact about him: he talked a whole lot. He wrote this, I didn't, so it's okay. From his days as a physician in sub-Saharan Africa to being an MPH student here at the Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and now a senior manager for clinical and medical affairs at a biotech pharma firm, CJ has traveled a path that has allowed him to use that speaking gift to fight and advocate for people who do not have a seat at the table. That seemingly unending fight is slowly won with every stage and opportunity he gets. So please welcome to the stage that very shy kid, CJ Madugulike.
All right, guys. Can you guys hear me? All right, awesome. It's double pressure. My mom is right there, and she is... I need to qualitatively impress this woman today. So forgive me while I hold the mic. It was the 1st of March, 2009. It was a Saturday, and I was on call. And like every doctor, I didn't want to wake up. I'm like, it's Saturday. Why do I have to deal with this? And it was an emergency room call. But I woke up from bed because it was my birthday. And I told myself that I was going to go ahead and give a gift to somebody today rather than expect a gift for myself. And so off to the ER I went, and this was in the University College Hospital, Ibadan, Southwest Nigeria. And I had the call phone on me about 9 a.m., the phone buzzed, and it was the nurse saying, you have a patient who has been in labor for about 24 hours. And she needs a cesarean section right now, and you guys need to come. So off we went, having no idea what was going to happen. I would call this patient Mrs. March, because it was the 1st of March, okay? So I walk up to Mrs. March with my team, and we meet Mrs. March and Mr. March. And this is a system where you have to pay before health services are provided to you, period. So Mrs. March shows up with Mr. March with about the equivalent of $2 worth of funds between them. And your wife has been in labor for 24 hours. It was either we sat on this story and made this man feel like a useless husband, or we did something about it. That was my gift to them. Out of pocket, which the hospital frowned against, I paid about $400 worth of treatment so things could get started while I ran out with what is called an indigent waiver form to the chief medical director's office to plead with them to write off the bill for every other cost that was going to incur as a result of this. Long story cut short, Mrs. March, Mr. March, and little baby March were okay, but I was $500 short. And rather than feel all happy about it, I thought, what about Mrs. April and Mrs. May, who I didn't get to see, who were going to inherently die because it wasn't somebody's birthday on the day off? So my frustration began to build. So I moved my things thanks to work and ended up in a different city, which was Nigeria's capital city in Abuja. And I was fortunate enough to be in proxy to the people who ran the nation. So I began to have these conversations with politicians and policymakers, and I was all about how do we make Mrs. March's experience the rule and not the exception. And I found one thing that was shocking. They didn't care. They were just here for how they could make it for themselves. And I thought, okay, this has to be a third world thing. This has to be an African thing. This definitely must be a Nigerian thing. So what was my solution? Leave Nigeria. So hello, Google search, Hopkins. And here we are. And fast track through 2012, I graduate, I'm all fired up. I came to Hopkins and through to Salve, I went through the policy concentration because I was ready to get things to work differently. And then I got a job in DC and I'm like, this is when it works. For those of you who were alive in 2012, which should be everybody in the room. In 2012, we had a bit of a governmental dilemma, in the sense that Congress was holding the Obama administration to ransom over budget cuts. And they had said that if they didn't get cuts to certain social programs like Medicaid and food stamps, that they were going to bring the government to a total shutdown. My job in DC was once again with politicians, and I was kindly assigned to the guys who ran, the congressman who ran the state of Mississippi. If you don't know anything about Mississippi, if you put it out of the union, is worse than the third world nation, just in case you didn't know that. So I was pulled into familiar territory. It was Mississippi. Hello, Nigerian boy, Mississippi, makes perfect sense. So off I went to Mississippi, and we went on and tried to talk to this man. And this was where I think I had what I've termed policy deja vu. They told us that the science makes perfect sense. The data all adds up, but we're going to vote party lines. And I'm like, but this is not Nigeria. This is not Africa. This is not a third world nation. And it hit me that our problem is a human problem. I say this not to discourage people here who want to go into policy, because I think you should come. It's a slowly turning wheel, but it turns. It might seem static when you're in the midst of it, but it turns. In 2013, there were cuts to Medicaid and to food stamps. But we're here. We keep pushing. We keep striving. And if anybody here speaks Politicnese, which is what I call the language of politicians, please sign me up for a class. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CJ. And I do have just one question, and this is for Mrs. Madugulike. How did he do? Is he okay? Did he do okay? He did good. Yeah. All right. A completely unbiased opinion there too. Great. Okay, so now we're at the interactive part of our day here. And so if you're interested in sharing a story, please raise your hand. We're going to do this. Hold on one second. We're going to do this 3 minutes tops, okay? If you're going to come up here, you have to take the pledge. I will only speak for 3 minutes, and then I will stop, okay? So if you're ready to share your story from the good fight, please go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, we've got one. There's one. Oh, sorry. Oh, right here. Okay, 2. Who else? Oh, okay, there we go. 3. Okay, awesome. So please go ahead and make your way over here. If you could, just kind of line up, and then first one in gets to go first. And again, 3 minutes. That's it. And we will hear your story. Oh, yes. And now the secret here is that Jess has the pretty kitty. If we could show the pretty kitty here to everybody. That's the sign you've got 30 seconds left. So that's because the pretty kitty goes to mean kitty when you go over 3 minutes, okay? Just want to make sure we know that. Okay. All right. So we've got, sir, would you like to come first? Sure. And you're taking the 3-minute pledge, right? Awesome. Okay, good. Thank you. And tell us your name. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Yep.
Thank you. I'm Zori Glazer, and I earned MPH in 1990. I started in 87.
Do you want to grab the mic?
Sure. I started in 87. It's not that I'm a slow learner. I was in the first group of part-time MPH students. At the time, I was on active duty as a public health officer and assigned to a little nonprofit group called the Food and Drug Administration. And at that time, the AIDS epidemic was well underway. And I had responsibility for the medical devices that were being implanted into humans. And one of the concerns was that the standard techniques for disinfecting medical devices were somewhat limited. Most devices can't withstand steam and radiation and so on. So chemical methods, liquids, and gases were being used, ethylene oxide, glutaraldehyde, and so on. And one of the devices that we had a great deal of concern with was flexible fiber optic GI endoscopes. And they were usually dipped into something and cleaned and hung up, rinsed, and then used with patients. And we decided to see if we contaminated those devices with the AIDS virus and then subjected them to standard cleaning procedures, whether or not we had inactivated all of the virus. And we found, much to our surprise and displeasure, that unfortunately we did not. So that was one of the many devices. I suspect I'm about out of time, so I'll stop at that point and perhaps at some future time talk about some other devices. Thank you.
Okay, we have our next person up. If you would like to join us over here, please come on up to the stage, introduce yourself. And then, sir, if you would like to, sir, if you're going to be next, if you want to come over here and just wait on the wings, that'd be great. Thanks. Please, go ahead.
I'm a little nervous. My name is Lindsay. I'm a current member of the MPH class of 2018. A little over 25% done. Midterms next week. So my moment of advocacy stemmed from when I became an AmeriCorps member with FEMA Corps in 2014. As a team leader, I was in charge of 8 young adults, and we traveled all across the country responding to different disasters, helping, serving the needs of whatever community we were assigned to. Little did I know that in the summer of 2014, my team would become responsible for over 10,000 unaccompanied minors who crossed the border from Mexico into Texas. As a team, we were assigned to Atlanta initially. We were getting ready for hurricane season. We were a GIS team working on mapping, trying to prepare the local communities throughout Atlanta. However, 24 hours before we were deployed, we were told, stop, you're gonna go to Arizona instead. We had no idea as we traveled down to the border what we were about to encounter. We figured, okay, there are gonna be a couple of hundred kids at most that we were gonna be responsible for. Over the course of each week, we processed through 1,400 children, finding them permanent housing. Okay, we thought, we can do this. We can help find permanent housing for these kids. That is not what our project ended up being about. We entered a 10,000-foot warehouse space that was not meant for human habitation. We saw a sea of children who had no idea where Arizona was on the map. They hadn't talked to their families in weeks. Some were orphans. Some were traumatized from their journey of crossing the border. So we were essentially there to serve these kids in between all these monster government organizations that had a lot of stake in what happened to these kids. Where advocacy came in was our team was the only thing standing between these kids and them understanding where they fell into this process. So we advocated. We advocated for outdoor space. We advocated for a diet change because the flour in the tortillas was making them sick because they'd never had processed flour before. The water was making them sick because they were not used to fluoride. They were not allowed to be physically touched or interacted with anyone except the AmeriCorps teams. So we went from really having no idea what we were doing to becoming the biggest advocates in these kids' lives. And because of that moment, that's why I'm here at Hopkins. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And please, sir, come on up. We have one more from the audience here, and this is your 3 minutes. Please.
Hi, good afternoon, folks. My name is Dr. Isaac. I'm an alumni, MPH alumni of class of 96. So I have to think about it, sorry. Okay, yeah. I just want to pick up on a few topics that were mentioned earlier, okay? Is that as public health practice in professionals, we need to have a dream. Many times we don't have that, okay? I want to pick, it was talked about in Michelle's speech as well, having a dream. I want to talk about it in a practical sense. So I want to give you a quick background. I'm originally from India, as you can see, but I grew up in Africa, starting from Ethiopia, Zambia, Zimbabwe. Okay, then I came here. So I joined, after finishing my MPH, I joined the State Health Department. And the program I got into was Public Health Emergency Preparedness, okay? So in Public Health Emergency Preparedness, we have a Maryland surveillance system. It's called ESSENCE. That's what I was trying to, it's an acronym. I was trying to remember that. I mean, it's a shame I can't remember it because I used to manage it, okay? Okay, yeah. So that ESSENCE is, it's a syndromic surveillance system, okay? So we get data from hospitals. And at that time, I thought, we're talking about H1N1. I thought, it's a good idea if you could get absenteeism data from schools. So I shared it with my team, talked to a few health officers. They told me that will never happen. I said, that's okay. Let's give it a go, okay? So I talked to my team. I talked to my director, got the permission. I said, you know what we are going to do? We are going to get absenteeism data from the schools on a daily basis. So if we know the absenteeism, we might be able to look at that something happening in the community, okay? So at that time, Professor Josh Shaftin was my Secretary of Health. He fully supported us. I must say that talking about policies, I want to say in public health, you need the policy support, okay? So as I embarked on the project, we were on it, and I remember meeting with one of the deputy secretaries. I won't mention them. In epidemiology, we are not supposed to identify people, isn't it? Okay, so we were having a weekly meeting with my boss, and she looked at me and she said, Isaac, you're a dreamer, isn't it? I said, yeah, maybe you need to dream. She says, this is only a dream. It's not going to work out, isn't it? I said, no, it's going to work out. He says, are you sure? I said, watch me. So we said, okay. So we embarked. Even one of our partners were actually the Hopkins APL lab, okay? They told me, Isaac, we have tried this before, it didn't work, you will not work on it. You will not get it done. I said, you watch us, we will do it. So we started my team, it was called the A team, okay? We went to every 24 county and we shared it with the team and addressed it. And at that time, Governor O'Malley was the governor. He was very much interested. He wanted a deadline when we would finish it. They were looking at before the end of the year. I told my boss, you know what? We will do 30th of September. Is that okay? She said, that's fine. But I told my team, we are going to aim for 30th of June. Okay? And that's when we finished, 30th of June. And when we completed the project, we were the first and the only state in the United States to get 100% participation from the acute care hospitals. That was, how many was it? 46 acute care hospitals in Maryland, and the public school systems. At the moment, we have more than 1,400 schools submitting data on a daily basis. We are the only state and the first state to do that, okay? So what I wanted to share with you is always have a dream, okay? Let not anybody put that dream, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Isaac. That's always encouraging to hear that even within bureaucracies, a dream can live. So that's wonderful. Okay, so we are going to move back to our regular portion of our program here, and Dr. Melissa Sontag-Brudo is up next. She's an attorney, activist, and co-founder and co-executive director of the Sharmas Outlaw Advocacy and Rights SOAR Institute in New York City. She has been part of the sex workers' rights movement for over 15 years and is currently focusing on advancing rights-based policy, advocacy, trainings, and capacity building for sex workers and survivors of trafficking. She can also be found desperately attempting to separate her two toddler boys who are invariably wrestling and or hitting one another. Dr. Bruno, please.
So the one thing I knew when I started working at the Sex Workers Project back in the fall of 2009 is that I did not want to work on the issue of human trafficking. It's not because I don't care about the issue, of course, but it's more because I was coming to the work from a very empowerment, sex workers work, third wave feminist perspective. And I didn't want to feed in or perpetuate sort of the mainstream predominant notions that the sex industry is inherently violent, that there's this male-female binary around the industry, and sort of the victim-whore binary that we really love to talk about in this country. And I really, felt like I wanted to continue to work with people who identify as voluntary workers. But as in all industries, the sex industry is incredibly complex, right? People's narratives, people's lives are messy, they're complicated, right? There's a lot of gray areas. And if you were to read, newspaper, Nicholas Kristof, watch any kind of movie about human trafficking, you would think that every story involved a little white blonde girl in pigtails who was kidnapped on her front porch and sold into sexual slavery. That's not a thing, right? We don't have, there are heroes and villains at certain points, but not these clean, neat little narratives, right? So there are two populations that I was really able to work closely with at the Sex Workers Project and now in my current organization that highlight the complexity, the messiness of the human trafficking experience, of the experience of people in the sex industry. The first is the trans community, specifically the trans Latina community. The Sex Workers Project had a very close connection to that community in Queens, in New York City. And many people, including law enforcement, are shocked to know that trans individuals are trafficked, and in fact, are more vulnerable to being trafficked than gender non-binary individuals, cisgender individuals, because of the incredible discrimination that they face. And so a narrative that I would hear from especially my trans Latina immigrant clients is that they escape their home country, come here, have really nothing, and the first person that they trust that's nice to them, whether it's an intimate partner, another trans woman, then turns around and abuses them. And it's incredibly complex. It is not, there are good people doing bad things, there are bad people doing good things. It is messy, and it is the human story. And another group that I began to work with, and that I'm seeing now these cases all over the country, is young women that were trafficked themselves, now talking generally about cisgender women, who were trafficked themselves, but are also charged and convicted of human trafficking and are registered sex offenders, right? So you imagine you're reading your newspaper, read a story about Samantha Smith and how she trafficked many young girls. That's not a real person, just using a placeholder. How she is serving 30 years in federal prison as a registered sex offender because she trafficked minors. And you think, what a monster. How could she have done this? Well, I can tell you, she did this because our lives are messy and complicated, and because she was herself a victim of human trafficking, and because that was the reality that she knew, and that the trafficker was her intimate partner. She loved him, she believed in him, she was manipulated by him. Whether it was lending him her cell phone to call the younger girls, whether it was lending computer to upload photos to post, online, whatever it was where the complexity of her life led her to be, right? And now here she is, serving time, and when she gets out will be a registered sex offender, and anyone can Google her name. So basically all came full circle in that I got to focus so much of my career, and I continue to do so, on vacating convictions for survivors of human trafficking, right? And when you tell people that my clients are victims and criminals, their mind is so often blown, right? That, our criminal justice system is not just. And, it has really allowed me to delve into the complexities and the messiness of all of our lives and of the human experience in doing this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brito, and thank you for highlighting not only the issue of sex trafficking and then women who are both victims and then criminals at the same time, but highlighting that challenge of that one narrative that is sort of within our heads all the time, where we latch on, oh, here's how things happen. And you're very right, things don't always happen like that. The world is a much messier and more complicated place than we often think of it as. And it's a challenge for us, for people who write, to realize that things are messy, things are gray, and not just one way. So I appreciate that very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Waruguru Wanjau, who is a Kenyan, Pan-African, a physician, a current MPH student. Waruguru has experience in both spheres of global health, in clinical work in rural, low-resource communities, and working with the WHO. She enjoys classical music, chocolate sprinkles, and motorcycles. And I have to tell you one quick story too. I was fortunate enough to be at the World Health Assembly back in May, and I got an email while I was there from Waruguru. She gets Global Health Now, and she saw on Global Health Now that I was actually there, and she arranged to meet. And I met with her and immediately was captivated by her brilliance and her personality. And as soon as I got back, I went straight to JL and said, wow, I just met this amazing student who's going to be coming to the school. We've got to meet her. And so anyways, we're very happy to have you here, Waruguru. Please, come on up. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Waruguru, hopefully a future alumni of Johns Hopkins. At the moment, struggling with biostatistics, but learning. So before coming to Hopkins, I was in an interesting place. It was 2016, and like every other year, the government released the list of where the newly released medical officers were going to be posted to. It's a random allocation. Take a list of names, take a list of places that need doctors, and bunch them together. As luck would have it, I ended up in a place that's called Samburu. Samburu is 350 kilometers away from Nairobi. I grew up in Nairobi my whole life. I went to medical school in Nairobi. And even the year I was away from Nairobi doing my first year of supervised training, I'd go back home because I wanted to, watch a movie, eat at a restaurant because I'm a city girl. But I was here posted to Samburu and I thought, well, okay, it's 350 kilometers away from Nairobi. I'm a bit adventurous. I've traveled across Kenya. It's my country, no biggie. I'm going to serve my people. So journey with me to Samburu. The first 250 kilometers look like the rest of Kenya. Cities, tarmac roads, and then you hit that 250 kilometer mark. And then you transition into another world. It's not paved. There are no set roads. So one day we'd be using this road, another day we could be using a possibly different road. You never knew what road you were going to. That last 100 kilometers would take you anywhere from 3 hours, and one night we stayed on the road for 12 hours because the road, they trained, there was no road, you had to dig the bus out. But it's fine, I'm adventurous, I'm serving. I was happy to be there. It was a game drive. We'd see elephants, we'd see zebras. It really is another world. And then I was transplanted, this city girl was transplanted into the Samburu community. In this Samburu community, they have kept their traditions from thousands of years ago. They do not wear modern clothes. They do not speak the national language. Most of them do not live in permanent structures. And they still hold their cattle and their herds. That is their currency. That's what's important to them. But I'd been trained, 5 years of medical school, 1 year of internship at a really good center. And so I was ready. I was ready to make diagnosis, write prescriptions, treat the people. But then I had to learn. I had to learn very many different skills. I had to learn how to tell how long it has been that a goat's tail had dried. Because before Samburu people die, they have a burial ceremony to usher them off into their next life. And part of the ceremony means you take a goat's tail and tie it around the hand. And why would that be important to a doctor? Because that's how my stroke patients presented. I needed to know how long ago they had had the stroke, which is not something I could get from a history. But because I could tell how long ago this goat's tail had been around their hand, I could then tell how long ago they had had the stroke, because they'd do this ceremony in anticipation of the patient passing away, but the patient wouldn't pass away, the patient would get better, and then they'd bring them to the hospital. But for a long time, what I was being told and what I was seeing wasn't correlating until someone taught me that this is what this means. And so I stopped asking how long ago did the patient get sick, because that would give me a different story. I started asking another Samburu person, how long is that? Like, how long has it taken for that goat tail to be that dried? And for me, giving my stroke patients the right treatment, that was the most important thing I had to learn, that this was their culture and that's how they treated their people. Another time I was combated with the Samburu culture is when I had a 70-year-old patient. She was 70, we worked her up. She had a myriad of different diagnoses that I couldn't put together. So I was treating her symptoms, I worked her up, but there was nothing that was tying everything together. All patients get HIV tests, but you most of the time had to follow up. I learned to follow up on all patients just to make sure I had a clear diagnosis, but she was 70, so I was trying to figure out all other things. And the next day I have a ward round with my consultant. I present my workup, how I've treated her for all the symptoms, how I'm trying to get her diagnosis, but I don't have anything that's tying up. He looks at me, he looks at her, and he says, "Oh, grandma, you're a traditional birth attendant." And I'm like, where did all this come from? He'd been there for longer, and because of her bleeding, he was able to tell that she was a traditional birth attendant, and immediately I was able to tie it in all. We ended up giving her the HIV test, and this 70-year-old lady had HIV because she was a traditional birth attendant and likely had attended to someone without gloves. And these stories were, for me, something I'll carry on as I continue my global health journey, that as we serve people, they live in their cultures. And until we understand the realities of the people we are serving, it's difficult to then give them the care that they need and the health that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Waruguru. And it's wonderful to hear, too, just that reminder that people live in their culture. It's amazing, too, how we have to actually think about that, but absolutely. Great. So we have our last speaker up, and this is Zeke Cohen, who represents the 1st District of Baltimore City on the Baltimore City Council and is chairman of the Education and Youth Committee. After graduating from Goucher College, Zeke taught in West Baltimore and took a group of his 8th grade students to help rebuild a home in New Orleans. As a teacher, Zeke was awarded the Elizabeth Lawrence Prize for Excellence, and he earned a master's degree in public policy from Johns Hopkins. He started a nonprofit, The Intersection, to help young people learn community organizing and civic leadership. He ran for office with the belief that democracy only works when everyone has a voice in the process. Welcome, Zeke.
So last November, I was elected to the Baltimore City Council, which is somewhat of a lifelong dream. And it was one of the best nights of my life. And then I woke up the next morning, and guess who got elected president? Oops. I represent the 1st District, which is Southeast Baltimore, and it is one of the most uniquely diverse places in our city and maybe in our country. It is traditionally home to Italians, we have Little Italy, to Greeks, we have Greektown, to the Polish, to the Ukrainian, and over the last 15 or so years, to largely folks from Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, some folks from Mexico. It is a place of immigration. And so, within my first 2 weeks on the city council, I get a call that 2 of our community members, 2 of my neighbors, have disappeared. Where have they gone? Well, ICE has snatched them up, Immigration's Customs Enforcement. They went into a Walgreens right in Highlandtown to go get their medicine. They came out and they were apprehended by ICE. A few weeks later, I get a call that a father of a 9-year-old child in one of our elementary schools was taken by ICE right outside of his son's school. Now, what you should know about these 3 men, what they have in common is that they had no criminal record. They weren't drug dealers, they weren't violent criminals, they weren't gang members. All they were doing was trying to live their lives here in Baltimore. And when I got this call about the father who was taken outside of his son's school, there was a panic in the community. And all of a sudden, we saw our attendance at our elementary schools drop precipitously. All of a sudden, public safety was being undermined because folks, our undocumented folks who live in our district, were afraid to communicate with law enforcement. And we know when that happens, people are going to get robbed and not report it to the police. And so I get this call from a young person, a high school student, who's part of this group, Oye, and they say, Councilman Cohen, 3 of your constituents have been taken by ICE. This is unacceptable, and we need you to step up and be an advocate on this issue. And I didn't know too much about immigration at this point. To be honest, I've been a public school teacher, I ran a nonprofit, I'm chairman of the education committee, so I kind of thought my path on the city council would be about schools and about our kids. But here's a young person calling me up saying, we need you to advocate on this issue. So all these young people come to City Hall and they sit me down and they say, and I say, what do you need me to do? What would that look like? And so they say, well, we want you to introduce a resolution in the city council proclaiming that Baltimore is a welcoming city, right? Similar to a sanctuary city. And we want you to make it very clear to the agencies, particularly the police department, that they are not to work with ICE, that they are not to coordinate, that ICE should not be issuing detainers and taking people out of our jails. That's what we want you to do. So I say, sure. And so I introduced this resolution at the city council, and Baltimore is a really interesting town. It is, as I'm sure you've all learned very quickly, It can be challenging. It can be racially tense at all times. But I introduced this resolution, and it passes with unanimous support from my colleagues. Every single city council person stands with me in saying Baltimore is a welcoming city, and we want it to stay that way, which is great. And so then, that night, I get a call from someone who I never thought I would get a call from, and that happens to be the Tucker Carlson show on Fox News. Not someone I thought I'd get a call from. And Tucker's producer says, Councilman Cohen, we heard you've passed a welcoming resolution in Baltimore, and we're interested in having you on the show. So I go to the OYA group, I go to the young people, and I say, what do you think about this? I mean, would this do more damage than it's worth? But the young people say, no, you need to tell our story. You need to be out there. Because we can't, because some of them are undocumented, but you can. And you need to step up and be in public. So I say, okay. So I get on Tucker's show, and it's very bizarre. I'm in this little box, like I'm not in New York, I'm in Baltimore, I'm in the local studio, and I can see this image of Tucker. And Tucker's narrative that week is there was a rape of a young woman in Rockville, Maryland, right? And some of you remember this. The suspects were 2 Latino kids, both undocumented. And so Tucker's whole narrative, Fox's whole narrative that whole week was about Mexican rapists and immigrants coming here to destroy our country and all this stuff. And so I get on the Tucker Carlson show, and Tucker says, how can you do this? You're turning your city over to the criminals. Why would you want to do this? And I remind Tucker that, no, that's actually not factually correct. Actually, immigrants commit less crimes than naturally born Americans do. And if you look at Baltimore, in my district, immigrants are rebuilding our city. If it weren't for the Honduran, the Guatemalan, the Salvadorian community in Highlandtown and in Upper Fells Point and in Greektown, our communities would look like so many other parts of our city that have been depopulated. These folks have come here. They've built houses. They've built businesses. Their kids are in our schools. And Tucker says, yeah, but they're taking our jobs and they're taking away, our taxes. And I remind Tucker that my great-grandmother came here from Austria to escape the Holocaust. The rest of my family passed away, perished in concentration camps. And thank God this country accepted my great-grandmother, because if they hadn't, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And so in the end, Tucker and I agreed to disagree. Right? So I get out of my little box, and I check my cell phone, and it is like blowing up, like nonstop, buzzing, like I can't even hold it because it's buzzing so much. And I'm like, ugh. So I look down, and my inbox is filled, literally thousands of emails from people around the country telling me what a jerk I am. And telling me that I'm destroying America and that this is the end of our country as we know it. And my grandma would be ashamed of me, and she came here legally, and so on and so forth. And so this goes on for about 3 days, and the emails start to get worse and worse and worse, and our office starts to blow up with phone calls from people all around the country to tell me what a jerk I am. And they also start to get violent, right? There are some death threats. There are some swastikas and Pepe the Frogs, which is the new thing. And so I'm just filled with all of this hatred in my inbox, on the phone. They get my wife's Facebook profile, and somebody says, oh, that's why he's out here doing this, because his wife is a Muslim terrorist. That's what it is. And by the way, my wife is Hindi, and she's certainly not a terrorist. She's actually a psychiatrist. But they take her profile, and it's all over the internet, and they find my family, and they got everybody's profile, and it's just absolutely crazy. And you're in one of those storms, media frenzies, and and you don't really know what to do, and it's intense, and the Oye youth are like, well, thank you, and thank you for telling the actual story. Thank you for talking about what Baltimore really is, that it is a welcoming city. And so someone the other day asked me, would you do this again? I mean, would you, if you were in that same situation, given how much vitriol and hatred and all the rest, would you go back on there? And my answer is yes. And the reason is because when the Statue of Liberty says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free, she beckons to not just my great-grandma, but to my Honduran neighbor as well. This country is made for all of us. We rise and we fall together. Justice knows no boundaries or borders. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeke. Thank you for that wrap-up and inspiring message. And if we could, please, everybody give all of our speakers a round of applause, too. Okay, thank you. And I want to close with this last note that earlier today I sat in on a meeting of the Summer Scholars students here at the school with Michelle Sidibe, who is Executive Director of UNAIDS, and he said at one point in there, he said, "You are here to make the world better." And I thought, absolutely. And I think that the speakers we heard today, all of you are here to make the world better. So I appreciate all of your work. I think it's amazing work that happens here at the school and happens through all of our alumni. So thank you. And we want to say thank you again for everybody. If you can join us now for a reception in Finestone Hall, back upstairs. And we are good to go. I think we're wrapping up. And thanks very much. Okay, thank you.